You can speak?
Okay, all right.
Okay. Why are you so far back? Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I think it's time to get started, please. I have two brief announcements. One, all the award winners who will be talking this afternoon, after the second talk, after Sandra Waxman's talk, before lunch, each of you please come up so we can get your talk set in the computer. The second announcement is that there's the banquet tonight. The buses will be right out front here at 7:45. 7:45. They will leave without you, so make sure you're here. Okay, so we're ready for our first speaker. We're allowed to call him George, because it's a little difficult. So this is George Gorgay, and we are very pleased that he was able to accept our invitation. So, George, please.
You hear me? I can shout too, if I need to. So especially given the great company I'm talking with today, Sandra Waxman and Sue Carey and the poster awardees, and I'm wearing an unusual amount of badges. The reason is, I need to say this is that I'm coming from the Central European University. Some of you may have heard the kind of like Putin, Trump type of attack that our university is going through and may be thrown out of the country. It's a private American university in Budapest, and this is to protest against these shameful acts. And the other reason I'm here, apart from this, is to introduce Sandra's talk, because I think what I'm going to say will be a very good kind of lead-up, if I'm not mistaken, to her quite related interests. So, oh yeah, as to this title, a lot of people work on brain here, and maybe they already are put off by this title, but I just want to make it more, just point out that there is an ambiguity in this title. The claim is not only that it is possible to communicate and read communicative mind without language, but also by preverbal infants who do not have language. So this is all about preverbal infants communicative abilities. So what I call the pragmatic sense is the human's evolved capacity for verbal and nonverbal forms of ostensive communication. And this is really kind of our species' unique communicative instinct for a large variety of epistemic cooperation where we are enabled to exchange and transmit a broad range of relevant information across a variety of contexts. And the way human communication can do that is that it is very complex. And it is complex in a way that, well, I'll call here a mixed communicative system, because it has evolved really two basic kinds of mechanisms for information transfer. One is code-based conventional symbols like linguistic mapping devices, like spoken words, together with their combinatorial syntactic apparatus, and also conventional gestures, and these together encode a flexibly variety of relevant information, and can also be used to decode these informations. I should mention here that all known forms of evolved animal communication, the non-human animals communication, exclusively rely on code-based mechanisms, which are very few, typically in number, very domain-specific. Their mapping to meaning is pre-specified and innately transmitted, like vervet, monkey, CAOS, and I'm not going to give you many examples, so I can get on. And in humans, the decoding of the conventional words and gestures allows, especially in verbal communication, to recover the literal or sentence meaning of a verbal utterance used in a sentence or in a given context. However, the other and absolutely human-specific, as far as you know, the mechanism is an inference-based mechanism of context-sensitive pragmatic inferences of communicative mind reading, which allows to go beyond the literal meaning of sentences to what, since Grice's insight and current-day pragmatic theories like relevance theory propose, is recovering the intended meaning or the speaker's meaning, which is the real aim of a communicative, even in verbal communication, to use code-based symbols. So there are these two mechanisms, but I want to say a little bit about their relation to each other, and actually just point at three arguments to suggest that there is a primacy of the pragmatic inferential component in the human adaptation for ostensive communication. And the first argument, and I really will just point at these arguments, these are coming from communication theory, pragmatics, and linguistics, that there is a very convincing large amount of work showing that the code-based linguistic mechanisms are not sufficient to explain comprehension, especially to recovery of the intended meaning in context of communication, and while they may be used to decode the literal meaning, that is only an input to the further context-sensitive inferences that are necessary to identify inferentially the speaker's intended meaning. There is also an argument one can make a paradox kind of out of it, of word learning, how the meaning of words are acquired, especially if a code-based approach would suggest that one needs a code to understand a communicative meaning. So they are transmitted by codes. However, since these codes, the mapping between code and concepts, meanings is conventional, they must be acquired, they are not innate, and so one needs to understand communication in order to acquire the code of language. So, in particular, if one assumes that children acquire the meanings of words by understanding what the speaker intends to refer to when using them, then the question arises as how they can understand what the speaker intends to refer to without knowing what the words mean. And that again, the kind of solution probably to this paradox is that we have evolved a capacity to recognize actions as ostensive communicative actions with this particular dedicated function, which indicate and serve to manifest the communicator's communicative intentions to transfer relevant and new information to the interlocutor. The hypothesis is that humans, under specific conditions, and infants can infer that a given action is really intended to be serving a communicative function, and that the communicator intends to communicate by means of this action. So that suggests that the solution of the paradox is that young learners, language learners, must rely on context-based pragmatic inferences in the first place to infer and acquire the conventional meanings encoded by novel words from the way competent speakers use them in various community contexts to transmit their intended informative meanings. The third argument is kind of related, but it can be made for adults and for infants, is that humans are extremely well adapted to engage in nonverbal forms of ostensive communication. So we have evolved a sophisticated ability to ostensibly communicate our informative intentions to an addressee by relying on purely nonverbal means of ostensive action, communicative action manifestations. And this can be done without the necessity to employ any code-based meanings. And there are two related theories around that have been exploring this claim. One is it's pragmatics, and especially post-Gricean pragmatic approaches like Sperber and Wilson's relevance theory of ostensive communication. And the other is what we call natural pedagogy theory, which is a special application of ostensive communication to transmit cultural, generic knowledge very early on. And Gergő Csibra and myself have been spending quite some years now to gather evidence for that position. Both of these theories claim that there is early evolved capacity for ostensive inferential communication, even without and before language acquisition. Okay. So how do we recognize ostensive communicative acts? The claim is that we have evolved sensitivity to certain special behavior signals that have become dedicated devices to manifest somebody's communicators, to recognize ostensive communicative interactions, and they induce the attribution of what I will call communicative agency. And there will be later, to connect up with Sue's work, also this question whether I will be claiming for distinction between two adaptations, one for intentional agency, which is kind of instrumental, goal-directed, intentional agency, versus communicative agency, where the instrumental agency is doing actions to physically change the world according to its goals, while communicative agents engage in behavior that change the other's mental states, like dispositions, beliefs, desires. So communicative intentions can be attributed by certain signals of ostensive communication, trigger the attribution of communicative intentions, which are intentions to demonstrate an intended referent about which the agent wants to convey new and relevant information for the recipient to infer. Now, the identification of the intended referent and the content of the informative intention, the new and relevant information about the referent, is what referred to as the informative intentions, referential and informative intentions, which are kind of the communicative intentions entail that you have an intention to transmit informative content about a referent. Okay. I'm going the wrong way. So what are these specialized ostensive behavioral signals that induce recognition of ostensive communication? And I have three types here. Our work has been, in natural pedagogy theory, concentrated on nonverbal signals, specialized behavior signals, that the third one here, that such as, and the claim were for three such cues of ostensive communication: establishing eye contact, being addressed by Mother Rees, and being engaged in turn-taking contingent reactivity at a distance. And in the meantime, a wonderful set of studies by Chris Onishi and Volumanos have shown that, which, not surprisingly, the innate sensitivity to human speech and speech sounds and novel words is itself sufficient to indicate the ostensive communicative intention and lead to the pragmatic inferences, I suggest. And then there are nonverbal, like deictic gestures of reference that allows a referential interpretation of the act, such as pointing or showing up. Lastly, I should mention that, in fact, any behavior can be, when presented in an ostensive addressing context, and sometimes marked by a special motor transformation of exaggeration, schematization, so they're not delivered by their most efficient functional manner, is a signal. These transformations, which call ostensive marking, is actually suggests that this behavior is now used for a communicative purpose. So it's different to hammer a nail in and show somebody how to hammer a nail in, and these transformations, which are not sub-efficient but signal the communicative intent. So really, all of this is available to recognize communication. And to get to the meat of my talk, I would like to just make the point that, according to this approach, recognizing ostensive communication induces two types of pragmatic inferences. First, when one knows that one is being communicated to, one wants to know what about. So one wants to identify the referent, disambiguate the referent, the intended referent of the other, and there are expectation of behavior signals coming that will allow me to do that. And however, that's not the end of the story, because I can identify what the other is attending to, for example, but I also want to know or develop an expectation because of recognizing ostensive communication, communicative intent, that now I am expecting even more information that will allow me to figure out the new and relevant information that is relevant for me that the other is offering about the intended referent. So there is referent identification and the inference to the content of the new and relevant information. Okay, so this is the three cues that we have proposed, and I will signal very briefly the first kind of inference, the kind of evidence we have, the first kind of inference, which is that there are ostensive cues induce an expectation for further cues of referential nature that are referential signals that allows the baby to identify what the communication will be about. And these referential cues, like gaze shift, pointing, have the communicative function of demonstrative reference. This is a well-known study by Senju and Chibra. It's an eye tracker-based study which simply shows that 6-month-olds are ready to follow the gaze, which is as a referential cue to the object that the other is kind of pointing out. But unlike in animal communication, when there is following of gaze direction often to share the attentional focus of a conspecific. However, in humans, it seems that this response has been conditionalized to some degree, at least, on first having been addressed. So the it only takes place if first you have been addressed with ostensive communication. So eye contact and motherese have been shown to need to precede a gaze shift to be followed to the referent. So this looks, I'll show the adult-directed speech example.
Hello?
That's just an attention getter, and you can see that we can follow whether after this mother is hello, baby is followed to the 6-month-old to the fixated object or not, and compare it
Hello.
to this adult-directed speech. And we get a very similar kind of, these are 3 indices. The first looks, frequency of looks to the 2 sides, and duration of time spent on the 2 sides. All of them clearly show that the infant-directed speech case, infant significantly, these are different scores, which way you look. So they follow the gaze, but only if it has been preceded by a direct eye contact or by a motherese, and not without those. Now, okay, so my focus will be on the third type of cue, and our work on turn-taking contingent reactivity. And this is the cue which has been claimed to play this function. It has been, there was some controversy, there is some controversy, partly for Sue's always constructively critical attention to our work. But basically, the point is that while for the other 2 cues, there is evidence, I'm not going to talk about in lack of time, that not only referent identification is induced by the ostensive cues, but there are further, well, the other type of inference for what's the new and relevant information about, for example, showing new artifacts, what they are for, whether the kind, learning about a kind of artifact can be driven by that. We have evidence on from a number of studies for the other two cues, but we only have evidence up till now for the gaze following when it comes to, so the first kind of referential inference. And what I want to do is first of all describe that nature of that evidence and then go on to some studies that show that the inference of new and relevant information can be also induced by this abstract behavior pattern of distal interaction. Okay? So these studies have a long history. The first study was done by Movellan and Watson, and then Susie Johnson, Virginia Slaughter, and Sue Carey has developed further that paradigm, and both of them showed that the baby reactions contingently influencing a robot's non-human, featurely non-human entities' reactivity will induce a gaze following of an orientation change towards an object. And this is just this is just for historical reference. This is from the original study of John Watson, and it shows how fast infants, how reactive infants are of the contingent, the causal contingency at a distance that they can exert on an unknown object. So on the right side, you see this robot. This is before computer times, and the baby's vocalizations are the response, and somebody pushes a button, and then the robot is vocalizing back. And bingo. So there are a number of interesting things about this. One is that Jones Fuchs showed that distal contingency also evokes smiling and cooing, which are social responses. So it suggests that even if it's not a human person, the high degree of contingent control over its behavior is kind of interpreted as in the social domain. And the idea then that this was taken up by many other suggests that this suggests that the child attributes social intentional agency, at least to this robot, with a referential interpretation of distal actions, which implies perception. Oh yeah, because then I forgot to say that after this, there are two objects on the side, and this robot just turns towards one of them. And the baby is, when this contingent reactivity was presented, they follow the gaze. In a yoked control design, where exactly the same amount of vocalizations by the robot randomly related to the baby's behavior, they do not follow the gaze. Here is a kind of a more modern day computer-based replication or attempt to look at this with Ernő Teglash. And here the baby has in his sock a movement sensor, and that can register online the kicking behavior of the baby, and the movements of that thingy that the baby sees there is controlled by the baby's kicking. Okay? And we have two conditions, and then after a training phase, there are two objects revealed, and there's an orientation towards one or the other. And we watch with an eye tracker whether the baby has followed or not. And indeed, if in the contingent case, where the baby controls the movements of the object, they are significantly following the orientation to the object. That was 12 months. This is a totally automatized kind of computer-based design where the baby sees these unfamiliar objects, and the middle one that you can see marked out the region of interest, in the contingent version, when the baby's response here is to fixate that object. When the baby fixates, it moves. The other ones move randomly. The baby then has to come out of the region and with a saccade and go back again in order to make it move again. So this is, and after some training period, only these three remain, and then you get the turning response. And again, we could show with 8-month-olds that they follow to the referent of kind of indicated by the orientation response, but only in the contingent reactive condition. Now, there is a kind of a debate about the nature of the interpretation of these findings, and while we were pushing for this strong, well, in a sense, stronger interpretation that the baby is actually assigning communicative agency to this object and interprets the orientation to the target as not simply as a referential response of like seeing or attending to, which is an intentional goal-directed agent, reactive at a distance could do, but actually showing. So this is the difference between two levels of interpretation, whether gaze here is gaze to an object is due to seeing, attending, or in a goal-directed case like chasing an object, which could be giving grounds to assigning intentional agency, but not more. Intentional agents have this to referential focus, versus showing or communicatively referring, which is the communicative case. And, well, so I will argue for the communicative case here in two ways. I will show some cases where you can kind of derive differential predictions from this theory. First of all, if it's an intentional agent's referential focus that is being followed because of salience or because I consider conspecific, I want to see what he is attending to. Fine, that's, we may well do that, but what kind of agents would be in question? Certainly a goal-directed agent who has been observed chasing a prey satisfies all the self-propelledness, efficiency of goal-directed action, etc., and the distal perception of the goal object. So you would expect that if you show a goal-directed agent, and then after that the agent now shows orientation towards one of two target objects, you should follow it on the ground of an intentional agency story. So we had this kind of a chasing path set up. The baby is familiarized with the thingy chasing that object. And after that, I don't have the video, I just found this morning. After that, we put the agent again in the middle with two objects, and it just turns towards one, and babies do not follow this goal-directed but not communicative agent. Here, this is an interesting new study where we shows that turn-taking contingency can induce, for example, agent individuation, and that let me just keep the explanation of why that is expected from communicative agents. Just show you what we do. So there are three turn-taking interactions with variable responses on the side. Then the thingy goes back, comes out on the other side, and it's not. Now I wonder what your first reaction is, why it's not reacting. I mean, yeah? Well, people say, when I ask it, my impression was that some motivation, that he got angry with you or he's bored or whatever, he changed his disposition towards you. Now we did the same thing now, but with no turn-taking. So the little blue things does exactly the same thing, self-propelled movement, variability and everything on one side and nothing on the other side, but there is no turn-taking at all. There's just the duck is observing it, that's it. And now we reveal what's behind and what we show is we reveal, and there are either one or two objects behind. And it seems that the babies resolve this kind of unpleasant state of affairs that he was talking to me before here. And there's not, I'm just not replying here. It cannot be the same guy. There had to be another guy. My person, my partner is in there. And in fact, this relates importantly to and we have other data and other type of studies, cannot talk about it now, where it seems that communication is actually a cue to individuate the recipient of the communication, because communication is typically a pro-social, we are giving relevant information and it induces a long-term expectation of mutual reciprocity. So if I lend you money, I better remember I lend it to you and not to Sue, and go and ask back the money from Sue. So it is very important to know remember whom you communicate to. Now this is another set of studies where we are showing these highly contingent, one case imitative interactions between these two human shadow figures, and also temporarily contingent exchange of behaviors, but the behaviors are different. So in one case it's imitative, the other case the guy is always doing something else, but temporarily they are contingent. And what we were looking at is pupil dilation while watching these scenes. And we know, well, pupil dilation is, as you well know probably better than me, it can be induced by a whole lot of different factors. It certainly is well documented that processing load is related to pupil dilation. And so this is what the babies watch. Or the adults. So there is a guy does it first, the other does exactly the same afterwards. There are three types of movement, and they are always imitated in the imitative condition. Okay? In the non-imitative condition, you have the same three type of movement, but now they are complementary in terms of their production. So the first does A, the other does another movement again, another movement. So it's always a different movement, but they are temporary, perfectly contingent in the same way. Now, 6-month-olds, in looking, this is looking time, kind of preliminary data, but you can see that over the blocks, they, and what this shows is, it's looking time. So they continue to look more, I mean, they start to look less, let's say, to the imitative contingencies. So when there is variability, and that's the point I'm going to use, that there is variability in the exchange behavioral signals that induces probably more work, more processing of what that may be going on in 6-month-olds. And if you look at now phasic pupil dilation, you can see that over a long number of trials, there is significantly more pupil dilation. Basically, as soon as you figure out the difference on the third task, all over the trials. So again, suggesting more work, possibly more processing load for the variable contingency. We also have such a difference in just very briefly, in a tonic pupil dilation context, which in autistics we just don't find. Autistics don't seem to differentiate this. We also found a difference whether they face each other or turn away from each other. So this social communicative kind of positioning is again induces this pupil dilation. But now I want to go to the, I call it flatfish. It just got stuck because of, you will see the object we are using, and they look like flat fish. So these are supposed to be just really unfamiliar objects, and the question is that the queue of turn-taking contingent exchange of unfamiliar signal sequences, and here it will be important that now we have 3 vocal sequence imitated or reacted to by 3 vocal sequence, and what we vary is whether there is unpredictability or variability in this in the 2 sequences, or whether they are just parroting each other, so they are perfectly identical. And this is related to kind of an information theoretic idea that in order for new and relevant information, which has kind of propositional content and it can be many, many different types of information, you need a code system which has to have unpredictability in it, because without unpredictability, as since Shannon we know very well, that no information can get through the channel. So if there is actual hypothesis of what that here a new informational content will be transmitted, that is, I mean, I would here make a distinction between 2 types of ostensive communication. Ostensive communication can be like, even in animals, like the mating dance or asking for food and giving, which are give a very particular and unvariable message, and which changes the dispositional state of the other, like Dister's call in proximity seeking, even in human infant. However, if we want to say that ostensive communication is actually transmitting propositional information, new relevant information that the other doesn't know, it's relevant for him, but I know, then you need more. You need variability. And this is in the exchange, which is related to and Sandra will know what I'm talking about, the signals being considered as potential codes for meaning transmission in this case. So even unfamiliar and non-speech signals can take up that code-like categorization by infants if they are embedded in a turn-taking contingent. So basically, the hypothesis we tested really has 2 points. One, we say that the infant has to have perceptual access to a relevant change of state that he knows that another person has, for whom it will be relevant, doesn't know about because he went out. Like his ball has been put from one container to another, like in a so-called false belief task. And when he comes back for his ball, there was this other guy who stayed in and was present while this took place. And if they engage in turn-taking contingency, then if there is variability in that contingency, we tested whether the infant will think that he's correcting the false belief of the other, telling him where his ball has been put, so that without words, but inferring both the referent and the new information about the referent that has been transmitted. Okay? And this is how it, I better just jump to the two. So this is a 2 by 2. So either there is relevant change or there is no relevant change, which is like a false belief and true belief condition. The ball either changes its location in the absence of the person, or it just jumps out and goes back. So it has not changed its position. If his goal is to go to his ball, he should be able to. And we varied whether the contingent interaction had variability in it or not. It's a 2 by 2 kind of thing. It looks like this with, in melodic tones. This is so these are the flatfish, and they exchange these triplet of sounds. In this arrangement, the first sound is always replicated by the other, and the second two are varied. In fact, we did other type of variation, and as long as there is variation, it works. We wanted to get at some non-local algebraic dependencies, but that's not it. This is the echo condition. They just imitate exactly what the other is doing. So this is the familiarization. 2 groups of these are 13-month-old infants, and then the test is simply this. This is the first time they see this move, okay, and it orients towards one or the other. And in the variable tone case, we get a significant gaze following. In the identical tone, we do not. We also did it with Morse signals, so it works that way too. So I'm not going to show that. Then we were wondering that how important, is it the variability that's important, or it is also equally important that there are 2 agents, which would be have different communicative roles. One, the information flows from the knowledgeable to the naive, if it is communication. And in fact, if you just present one guy and the same sequence of sounds, which had the variability structure of the same, you lose the effect. So there has to be 2 agents being involved in this variable turn-taking exchange. Okay, so now I am over time. I'm sorry? Well, I show this kind of crucial study and then I'm done. This is 2 minutes, okay? So this is the false belief informing study. Now, here is this is the familiarization. The guy brings in his ball. They are kind of exchanging variable messages. When babies understand this, I shouldn't comment on what you see, I suppose. Takes his ball there, it doesn't go out, and they see the ball come out and either go back or go to the other one. And he always goes to where the ball, so he goes for his ball. This is the familiarization. And in the test, he comes again. He's not talking now, so he just hides his ball and leaves. Now the ball comes out and goes to the other container. And this yellow guy sees that, or, yeah. He comes back, and before going for his ball, they exchange views, okay? And then he goes to either one of the places, so either where the ball now is, or where he left it. And we have the identical repetition with the same, and this is what we get, that in the variable message condition, where there was a relevant change of state, so from container A, his ball was put to container B, where it is now. So in a variable exchange, infants expect the approach of the container where the ball is, so which is not where he left it. So this, on the basis of where he left it, if he would predict that that's where he will look for it, then this should be expected. Now you change that around, which suggests that the informational state of the returning agent has been changed in a relevant way, so his false beliefs have been corrected by communication to have a true belief, hey guy, now your ball is in this container, that's where you should go, and that's where he goes, that's where the baby expects him to go. When there was no variability in this exchange, so such a kind of an episodic propositional information could not have been encoded through signals, then we get the opposite. The guy is going back for the ball where he left it. His belief state about where his ball is has not been rewritten, that has not been changed because of this contingent interaction that had no unpredictability in it, so no information exchange could have passed through. And since I have been warned, I stop here, which is probably better for me, because I have a few more things that come with the true belief condition, and I'll be happy to discuss that with people later, but it comes out in a bit puzzling way. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm looking for hands in the back of the room there. It's right here.
Hello. So in the beginning of the talk, you said that referential communication is, maybe I'm wrong, but you said it's required for learning words, is that right?
Word meanings
for word meanings, okay.
need to be acquired, not that words are referential.
So
there is evidence that speech sound, human speech sounds an unfamiliar word from voluminous non-initiation, koba, you say this, and they know it's communication, even though those were human subjects who, but words seem to already bring ostensive communicative meaning with them and referential meaning with them.
Okay. I was just going to ask, because I think that there's some cultures where the babies are not directly addressed, and they still manage to learn their words. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay. So, most of our work with mother-reads, eye contact, and even contingent reactivity was infant-directed. So it was always, and so I showed some example that the infant induced and was kind of, or the infant was looked into the eye. Now, one of the novelties I didn't point out about this experiment is this is third person. So you have a communicative interaction in third person, and it seems that children are not egocentric about it. So even in this case, as if they would know that if it is ostensive communication, there has to be a flow of relevant and new information, and I just have to figure out who is the knowledgeable and who is the naive one. And they are happy to make that inference, which is kind of nice. I mean, nice of them.
I have a question about what you think the role of animacy is here, since particularly for some of your earlier experiments, you used artifacts, and it could possibly, another interpretation of some of your earlier data is that the subjects were operating on the world and interested in their ability to make a change on the world through eye movements and leg kicking and such, and that those findings weren't about communication per se, but they were about enacting change.
Yeah. So that's at the beginning I referred to distinction. I, together with Pierre Jacob, have been arguing for that adaptation for what we call the teleological stance, or which is an understanding goal-directedness in terms of efficiency of goal approach, where any action that in the most efficient way induces a change of state in the physical world is the domain of that system. And we also argue, and there is evidence that that's a more ancient system, so that other non-human animals, species also have that. Their rhesus monkeys have that, apes. There are now evidence, and there's wonderful evidence from scary evidence from, this is probably everybody makes this joke, that scary, Carey and Sparky are the authors that 3-month-olds already show the sensitivity to efficiency of goal approach. However, now, of course, agency cues, or the originally agency cues when the interest first arises, CIMeC, was self-propelled movement. Then it became important that the variability of movement, the possibility to vary your movement, is necessary for goal attribution, and also a justifiable variation of movement. So if you go around obstacles in an efficient-looking way, it's necessary. If there's no obstacle, or you go way around, then there's no goal attribution. But this is all instrumental agency. And communicative agency, these cues are not sufficient to get these communicative effects. And that is where Sue's position was, who actually tested this turn-taking and found that there has to be some social extra cues, like looking in at the other, smiling at the other, to interpret that goal-directed action as a communicative goal. So what we are arguing that, in fact, changing other people's mind, your choice of words and Greissian principles of economy and stuff like that is probably showing efficiency principles in communication, to achieve. You don't say more, just say exactly what is necessary for the other to change his mind in the right way. So there, the change of state is in the other's mental representation of the world and not directly of the world. But and efficiency is probably part of that system, but it's not, well, this actually would be interesting to apply to you know, how good, well-formed Gricean communication, where you don't say irrelevant things, you don't say too many things, you say the right, you know, you take into consideration what is needed for the other to change his mind, is all, it's a great skill that, however, goes for a long period of learning, I think. So babies are very good in receiving communication and lousy in producing communication at the beginning. So there is an asymmetry in this system, which is very interesting. But it is a different system, this being the claim that defending.
Thanks. I'm a little bit ignorant about the field, so I've got a very naive question. So how can you actually dissociate whether motherese is so effective because that's what children have been exposed to through their development, or whether this is really because of specific features about motherese? I mean, are there some populations, maybe children from blind people or whatever, that are not so much exposed to motherese, and does this modulate the
Yeah,
effectiveness?
this is a very important question. I can say two things about it. One is that preference for infant-directed speech, motherese, is innate. So we know that newborn babies show it. We also know that newborn babies of parents who cannot talk show it, so they couldn't have heard it in the womb, or minimal, so from some other speakers maybe, but and we know that autistic children do not show a preference for. Now that still leaves the question of the cross-cultural question, for example, which now stirs some degree of interest, and we ourselves we have this large EU grant that has comparative with apes and cross-cultural component in it. So we are planning to go to the Congo Basin with Barry Hewlett, who is a specialist in the Aka small scale hunter-gatherer cooperative breeder society, which allegedly doesn't use motherese. We know that even if they are innate, some of these communicative signals, they can be suppressed by culture. Because there is, for example, pointing. There's a culture where you point with your I cannot do it, I'm sorry, but you know, but they actually can adapt, and they really can, like nearly a finger long kind of kiss-like gesture they can do. But those children start to point, and it's just not polite, and they're punished for doing that, so soon they learn. So it's not impossible. I don't know whether, but there are claims, but there are all sorts of claims not necessarily well founded in the cross-cultural literature, but that would be an interest. So I would love that, because we have some evidence where the only cue is motherese, and we can show that that can induce an interpretation of the referent as a token of a referent kind, about which you learn like a novel functional thing that we make these little functional, you know, you manipulate and it makes light or something. And so they show kind-based individuation in the shoe and carry paradigm if motherese was, but you don't need to name those. So it's like those objects, only address the child in motherese before he sees those objects. Now, if I could take that paradigm down to the Akas, where I would make sure they really don't use motherese, or very little, I mean, you can go like gradation, And the prediction would be that if this is an adaptation, and we also argue that this is an adaptation to transmit in a very fast way cultural and opaque knowledge that inductively, with inductive generalizations, would just take very long and very hard to learn. So that's the just so story that we put behind this. So that's an open area where there is a lot of interest now to look at whether these adaptations for communicative transmission on face, basically, of novel information is a human cultural adaptation or not.
I have a young student over here. I can't make out the badge. I think it says Alf or Alphonse there.
Very ingenious experiments. I was struck by the experiment where the flat fish are either repeating the sequence or they're not, and it seems to have an effect on the infant's behavior. Where did the infant get that knowledge from, that communication requires different kinds of sound sequences? What are you assuming about how this ability comes about?
Well, I tend to assume that this is an evolved capacity. As we know there's evidence that for speech we are prepared, evolutionarily speaking, and we recognize speech sounds, and unfamiliar words are sufficient to trigger these inferences, even when you don't know the meaning of the words. But you assume that they have a coded meaning, and that must have transmitted information about the other's preference that this person didn't know. But the other said, Koba must have said, this is what I prefer, give that to me. And they expect that to be given to them. So just as there is at least this particular domain of speech and language where it's no news for the child, probably, that signals map onto CAOS. They just have to identify the mapping. In the same way, they may know something about information theory, in a sense, that variability of code-like signals is necessary to encode proposition information of a variety of sort. And as maybe Sandra will talk about, I don't know, but she has done very similar kind of studies where beeping was introduced in the turn-taking, but where with humans, and one of them was speaking. So there are several cues there. But after such an exchange, those beep sounds changed their power as in categorization tasks. Just beeps are not sufficient to categorize objects by feature into categories, but after that they are, and also the statistical learning about the sequential conditional probabilities become boosted or available for these signals after they have been experienced in a turn-taking fashion, which suggests that these signals start to be treated like potential words or chords.
Well, I think there's a big difference between saying that you've adapted to pay attention to certain kinds of cues and to say that you then transform those kinds of cues into information. Now the question is whether you need to have had some kind of experience to be able to actually extend from paying attention to sounds to extracting information. And I was trying to understand what exactly your claim is. Are you claiming that we've evolved to already notice the difference as communication versus experience in the context of being cued to sounds leads to the interpretation as information? Those are very different theories.
Okay, so let me I like your question, so let me backtrack just a little bit and say that, this cue, with 13 months old, to turn-taking, it in fact could have been learned, because they have, this just an abstract pattern of turn-taking interactions that highly co-varies with communicative interactions, where there is information transfer. So by 13 months, the infant may have had enough experience to extract that. And so I would buy that. And they are not cues or signals in the sense like mother is or looking in the eye can, which is just like a code. It just codes communicative intention. And this has to unfold in the interactive sequence. So it may have been extracted that way, but by 13 months it seems to be that.
So I buy every word you said today, except for something that you threw away. You several times say that what the baby expects is being transmitted is propositional information. And it's certainly they expect information to be transmitted, but you don't have the goods that it's propositional. So in the case where the baby expects two objects behind there, it's a different guy, you could say, he expects it's a different guy, he expects there are two objects. You're encoding it propositionally, but as you know from Dora's beautiful work, the content of what's being expected in that case piggybacks on the working memory object file representations, which are not propositional in either format or content. So I'm not saying it is, but we don't know what the format of representation of what's being attributed to the other, the information that's being encoded. And certainly that the name of...
So I'm glad I'm also connecting to your upcoming talk with this. Well, let me qualify it. So the statement was, I was trying to, and the more curious data I didn't present is kind of requiring this thinking. I was trying to make a distinction between two levels or strong or weak ostensive communication. So turn-taking at a distance implies attention to the other, implies coordination, temporal coordination, and could transmit type of fixed information like, in the mating season, oh, choose me, or give me food, and so they are changing the dispositional state of the other. However, to transmit, so I wonder about the level of description of the ball that was in A, is now in box B. I suppose it is a question of how, for example, Pierre Jacob is arguing that if you put a ball in a container which moves in the Piagetian invisible displacement task, then to represent that has to be propositional because the object is... So it is an argument, and it is a very important argument for our understanding of where and what kind of representations and when they come on and propositional representations are. But I really wanted to make the point about the variability that if you want to transmit proposition information, you need variability of the code system, so unpredictability.
So I agree with that. But what you have evidence for is that the baby takes variability as evidence for transmittal of information, right? So I agree
Of
that
relevant
that
information, yeah.
relevant information. But so that they know that they should update the model that they attribute to the
Yes.
seer, but that model might not be representational in format or content.
However, it has to be inferentially derived from the fact that communication has taken place. So it's communication-induced belief representation, whether it's proposition or not, yeah. I agree. I would love to know.
I was wondering about the contingency learning. So over development, how does it work that, I think like the contingency could be like, you could change the temporal integration window, right? And also the conditional probabilities, and both. I mean, if you for instance, make the conditional probabilities smaller and smaller, then of course you need to average over more trials in order to find out that actually there is some contingency, right? And the same thing is like, what is the difference in timing of the onset of when one does something and the next person. So I would assume that both of these things increase with development, but I was just wondering, how does it work?
You mean the degree of contingent dependency within the
if person A
exchange?
does something, then
Yeah,
person
well,
B does something.
I mean, we know from a lot of work from since John Watson, contingency detection, that infants are highly sensitive to identify different degrees of contingent dependencies. So, 6-month-old babies with relatively low responsive mothers develop a habitual level of contingency and prefer that even for a higher level contingency. So the mechanism seems to be there to differentiate between different levels of contingent dependencies. Also, I mean, these are very, very high. In normal, sometimes the other doesn't say something, or so you can degrade this in many different ways. However, we have varied the degree of variability in our non-echoing variable, and we got the same results. So which was not exactly what was our first, we were thinking more along the line that you suggested, that either the amount or a certain type of linguistic-like serial dependency structure may be what's driving the communicative attribution. But what we found is that as long as there is variability, and it can be totally variable, so the C sounds are totally variable, but temporally contingent, you get the same result. So it rather, what it suggests is that if there is no variability, that blocks the inference that a particular content has been transmitted that is relevant to the other. Yeah.
Okay, we're running a little bit late. It's time for coffee and the poster session. Let's everybody get back here by 11:20 at the latest for Sandra Waxman's talk, and then let's thank George for a beautiful talk.
You always putting your finger in. No, I am. I have been wondering.
I don't know. I'm going to make the case for no.
Yeah, good.
But
Well,
it can change tomorrow.
but in fact, it could be a simpler form of representation. I mean, it's just new and relevant for the other.
Exactly.
And episodic. That's another difference from our genericity bias kind of findings.
That's an amazing result. And it's also just an amazing result in the context of all the non-replications of the infant period of mind.
Yeah, well, this is